If you send a high school student like $630 on Apple Pay and text them 57 times a day and literally feed them out of your hand in front of a crowded classroom.
Which is just, I mean, beyond bold.
Right. You would assume the school's alarm bells would just be absolutely deafening. You would assume the institutional safeguards that are designed to protect children would slam down immediately.
Though without a doubt, you'd think it would be instant.
But, what happens when that institutional fire alarm is intentionally disconnected? What happens when bureaucracies prioritize their own self-preservation over the safety of the exact people they are built to protect?
Yeah, that's the real core of this.
Because today, we are looking at a case that proves the scariest predators aren't hiding in the shadows at all. They are actually weaponizing the spotlight.
It is a truly terrifying reality check on how we view safety. Because we assume that in an era of, total digital surveillance where every text, every location ping, every minor financial transaction is recorded forever.
Right, the digital footprint is permanent.
Exactly. We assume that exploitation on this level would be impossible to hide. But this situation reveals this massive blind spot. The data can be overwhelming, the evidence can be right out in the open, but if the human systems just refuse to process it, the abuse just continues.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking you into the mechanics of a massive, tangled web. What starts as this really shocking local news story out of a high school in Arizona quickly unravels into something so much larger.
It really does balloon into a national conversation.
Oh, absolutely. We are going to explore digital forensics, the hidden machinery of TikTok celebrity empires, catastrophic institutional cover-ups, and these intense national political debates regarding gender, justice, and honestly, how society even defines a victim.
And to do this, we've assembled a really substantial stack of source material for you. We are looking at deeply reported local investigative journalism from KJZZ Radio and the Arizona Republic.
Incredible reporting by them, by the way.
Truly. We also have the official police reports, the school district's own internal investigative documents, and because of the sheer cultural footprint of the people involved here, we're analyzing pop culture profiles from E! News and National Today.
Yeah, which is a wild pivot for a crime story.
It is. And finally, we are examining political advocacy reports, policy proposals, and press releases from an organization called SAVE, which stands for Stop Abusive and Violent Environments.
And right at the top here, we need to make something incredibly clear to you about that source material. The stack we are unpacking today includes some highly charged political viewpoints that span really the entire ideological spectrum.
Yeah, very polarized material.
You are going to hear arguments about men's rights, media bias, and massive shifts in political voting trends. And we want to be explicit with you right now.
Yeah.
We are not taking sides.
Absolutely not.
We are not endorsing any political figures. We aren't validating specific social movements. Our mission today is just to impartially report on how this source material frames these events. We want to understand the mechanics of the broader cultural conversation, not tell you what to think about it.
Exactly. Our role is strictly analytical here. We're going to break down the anatomy of what psychologists call a grooming playbook. We're going to examine the precise legal and bureaucratic mechanisms that allow these institutions to fail.
Right.
We'll look at how the digital influencer economy handles a real-world crisis. And finally, we'll explore how advocacy groups take a single criminal case and reverse engineer it to basically fuel a national political movement.
So let's start at ground zero. Centennial High School, located in Peoria, Arizona. This operates within the Peoria Unified School District. And the individual at the center of the initial investigative reporting is a woman named Haley Beck.
And at the time these events took place, she's 27 years old.
Right. She teaches world history, psychology, and sociology. She's also a soccer coach. If you just look at her resume on paper, she appears to be like the prototype of an engaged, dynamic young educator.
From a sociological standpoint, she occupied a very specific archetype within that high school ecosystem. She started working in the district around 2020, and she really cultivated the persona of the cool teacher.
Oh, we all knew that teacher.
Right. She had a highly social, casual relationship with her students. And furthermore, she possessed what you might call institutional armor. She came from a legacy family.
That's a huge detail.
It's massive.
Yeah.
Both of her parents were long-term established teachers and employees within that exact same school district. So she wasn't an outsider coming in. She was deeply woven into the fabric of the community.
Which is going to become critically important when we get into how the school administration handled complaints later on. But the core allegations against her completely shatter that cool teacher facade. Haley Beck is accused of entering into a prolonged, highly sexualized relationship with a minor.
Specifically, a 16-year-old sophomore who was a prominent member of the school's varsity football team.
When you look at a situation like this, the immediate question I always have is, how does this happen in a crowded public school? I mean, there are eyes everywhere.
And investigative reporter Hannah Dreyfus, working with child safety experts for the Arizona Republic, analyzed the evidence and concluded that this wasn't, a crime of sudden impulse. It was the execution of a methodical grooming playbook.
Okay, let's unpack this playbook. Because grooming is a term that gets thrown around so casually online now.
It really does. It's lost some of its clinical weight in casual discourse. But in a clinical and legal sense, it refers to a highly specific, progressive series of boundary-crossing behaviors. It's an intentional psychological process designed to normalize a dynamic that is inherently inappropriate while simultaneously isolating the target.
And the sources detail exactly how this functioned in her specific classroom. It begins with a phase that investigators label special treatment. Beck was allegedly taking the student's homework and just completing it for him. Yeah. She was falsely boosting his grades in her class. And if he missed school, she was like manually going into the system and excusing his absences so his attendance record remained completely flawless.
And we have to view this from the perspective of adolescent psychology. To a 16-year-old high school sophomore, especially a student athlete, dealing with the pressures of maintaining eligibility, this doesn't look like abuse to him.
No, it looks like he hit the jackpot.
Exactly. He's found an ally who's making his academic life entirely effortless. But look at the underlying mechanics of what the predator is actually achieving here. By subverting her professional duty, Beck is creating an immense debt of gratitude.
Yeah, that shared secret.
Right, she's establishing a clandestine bond based on these fake grades.
It's the deliberate manufacturing of dependency. I mean, if she stops boosting the grades, he fails.
Precisely. And on a practical, logistical level, it provides the perfect institutional cover. If another teacher or an administrator asks, hey, why is this specific student spending so much time in her classroom after hours?
The alibi is built in.
The alibi is already there. She can just say, oh, he's struggling, I'm tutoring him, look at how his grades are improving. It weaponizes the academic structure against the student.
But then the playbook transitions into a phase that I honestly found genuinely baffling to read about. They call it public boundary testing. The sources describe incidents that did not happen behind closed doors. They happened right out in the open.
Yeah, this is the part that shocks a lot of people.
Right. During a classroom project, Beck reportedly brought food over to the student and fed him directly from her hand in front of the entire class.
Just incredibly brazen.
And on a separate occasion, she walked up to him in front of the entire soccer team, handed him her personal car keys, and told him to go retrieve a quote-unquote Christmas present from her vehicle. How does a teacher rationalize doing that in public?
It seems reckless, sure, but within the mechanics of grooming, it is a highly strategic maneuver. Let's look at the function of public boundary testing. First, it normalizes an extreme level of personal and physical intimacy, but more importantly, it establishes a hierarchy within the peer group. When the rest of the class watches a teacher feed a student from her hand, it signals to them that this boy had an elevated, almost untouchable status.
Oh, that makes sense. It silences the peers.
Exactly. This perceived favoritism discourages other students from reporting the behavior because teenagers are highly attuned to social power dynamics. They assume, well, he's the favorite, the teacher allows it, so it's not my place to say anything.
It makes me think of an analogy. It's like a boiling frog scenario, or even like a hacker trying to breach a secure network. They don't just launch a massive attack all at once. They send a tiny ping against the firewall to see if the system's antivirus software even registers the anomaly.
That is a great way to look at it.
This public boundary testing, the feeding, the car keys, is the teacher turning up the heat just a tiny bit, pinging the school's social firewall. She is doing something slightly inappropriate right out in the open to see if the administration or the other teachers trigger an alarm before boiling over into total exploitation.
That is an incredibly accurate analogy. She is actively probing the institutional immune system. And when she feeds him from her hand, and absolutely nothing happens, no one complains, no one intervenes, she gets the data she needs.
The firewall is down.
She learns the environment is permissive. And once that is established, she becomes emboldened to move the manipulation out of the physical classroom and into a highly controlled private digital space. And that is where the sheer volume of this abuse becomes staggering.
Oh, the transition into the digital realm is where the true scope of this case is just blasted wide open. When the Peoria police finally got involved, they executed a search warrant on Beck's personal electronic devices. And the digital forensics they recovered are almost difficult to comprehend.
And numbers are shocking.
They extracted over 4,000 text messages exchanged between Beck and the student. But the terrifying part is the time frame. Those 4,000 messages weren't sent over the course of a year or two. They were sent over a mere 10-week period, specifically between June and August of 2025.
Let's break down the math on that to understand the level of enmeshment here. 4,000 messages over roughly 70 days equates to an average of 57 messages every single day.
57 a day. That's exhausting.
It is not a casual correspondence. That volume of communication requires constant, obsessive attention. It completely eclipses any standard teacher-student dynamic and mirrors the communication patterns of a highly intense, all-consuming romantic relationship.
And the platform they utilized was primarily Snapchat, right?
Yes, where Beck operated under the display name Sneakily Link.
Sneakily Link. I mean, it is literally broadcasting the intent to hide. But it isn't just the volume of the text that the police focused on. It was the financial trail.
The Apple Pay data.
Right. The search warrant uncovered that Beck had sent the student a total of $630 via Apple Pay.
Yeah.
She wasn't sending large single sums. She was sending it in microtransactions, $25 here, $30 there.
Very calculated.
The police records show she was paying him to buy alcohol. She was paying him to look at pictures of her. In one highly specific instance, she offered him $5 in, quote, gas money, unquote, for every time he gave her a compliment. The report notes he gave her 5 compliments in June of 2025, and she instantly sent him $25 on Apple Pay. I mean, why such small increments?
Because the goal isn't to make him wealthy. The goal is behavioral conditioning. This is a classic operant conditioning mechanism. By keeping the payouts small and frequent, she ensures that he constantly has to return to the source to get more.
Wow.
What's fascinating here is how the financial transactions completely invert the traditional power dynamic of a classroom while simultaneously tightening the predator's control. She is effectively purchasing his compliance.
And she knew what she was doing.
Oh, Beck was acutely, explicitly aware of this dynamic. The digital forensics recovered a text where she captioned a money transfer. By writing, this money exchange just felt like straight prostitution.
That is a chilling text to send to a minor.
She isn't hiding the reality from him. She is forcing him to acknowledge the transactional nature of their bond.
And the emotional manipulation running alongside that financial control is just intense. The sources highlight texts where the student actively refers to her as his sugar mommy. But instead of leaning into that, Beck gets highly offended.
Right, she rejects that term.
She replies that she hates the title because it makes her feel, quote, used. She demands that he call her darling or doll instead. In another thread, she lashes out at him, texting, "You better suck up right now because I cried myself to sleep last night because you didn't say you love me back."
That specific exchange, the 27-year-old woman crying herself to sleep over a 16-year-old boy's lack of affection, is a textbook demonstration of a psychological concept known as adultification.
Adultification. Tell me more about that.
Beck is completely abdicating her role as an adult and placing the massive burden of her emotional stability squarely onto the shoulders of a high school sophomore. She is casting this child in the role of a mature, emotional partner who is singularly responsible for her psychological well-being.
Which is an impossible burden for a kid.
It creates a devastating trap for the victim. If he tries to establish a boundary or pull away, he is instantly weaponized with guilt for causing his teacher profound emotional pain.
And the financial tether is always right there to reinforce the guilt. The search warrant details a text where Beck admits to him, quote, "If I cut you off from the money, benefit from all this, I really fear you would never speak to me."
She knows exactly what the anchor is.
She does. And when you look at how the student replies to her throughout these 10 weeks, the contrast is incredibly jarring. At one point, they were discussing how the relationship started, and the student texts her that back when he was a sophomore, she was, quote, 1,000,000,000% overweight, unquote, and he would never have hooked up with her back then, but now she looks, quote, fire.
It is a surreal juxtaposition. You have the victim communicating exactly like what he is, an immature teenage boy evaluating a woman purely on superficial high school metrics.
Right, he sounds like a teenager.
Exactly. Yet he is caught in a web stunned by a woman deploying highly sophisticated emotional coercion and financial manipulation. The power imbalance is massive, even if the victim's crude language sort of masks his vulnerability.
It gets even stranger, though. In one specific text thread documented by the police, Beck claims to the student that she's currently dating a police officer, and the student's reply, which I am pulling directly from the police report, is this, quote, "Nah, for sure. I mean, if I was 27 and had a boyfriend that was a cop while I'm breaking the law with my student, I'd probably be conservative with my services as well, but I don't know. I don't have any experience, just a thought." Unquote.
That response is deeply illuminating regarding the psychology of a groomed victim. He clearly understands the objective reality of the situation. He explicitly states that what they are doing is breaking the law.
He calls it out directly.
He recognizes the immense risk. Yet the grooming process has been so thorough, the financial and emotional dependencies so deeply entrenched, that he is discussing his own statutory exploitation with this kind of detached, cynical irony. He has been entirely consumed by the warped reality she constructed for him.
But as suffocating and complex as Haley Beck's grooming playbook was, the investigative reporting uncovers a twist that makes this case infinitely darker. This specific 16-year-old boy was not just dealing with Haley Beck.
No, he wasn't.
He was trapped in what child safety experts refer to as a dual predator environment.
This is the point in the deep dive where the concept of institutional failure goes from deeply concerning to absolutely catastrophic. During the course of their investigation into Beck's digital footprint, the Peoria police detectives uncovered that a completely different teacher at Centennial High School was also preying on this exact same varsity football player.
A second teacher.
Her name is Angela Berlacca. At the time, she was 47 years old. And her specific role at the high school, she was a teacher of child development and occupational programs.
I need to pause on that for a second. The teacher whose specific professional discipline is child development is the second predator. I mean, you can't write this stuff. What exactly did the investigation reveal about her involvement?
The police discovered that Berlacca had been sending this same student sexually explicit videos of herself. This included highly graphic videos where she is masturbating and actively moaning the student's name.
Horrific.
And the entire situation only came to light because the student's grandmother was looking at his phone, discovered these horrific videos, and immediately reported it to the authorities.
Now, when I first read that, my immediate assumption, and I assume the police thought this too, was that this had to be a conspiracy. You don't just happen to have two separate teachers targeting the exact same kid in the same building by coincidence. Did they plan this together?
That was the initial hypothesis of the Peoria police detectives, actually. They launched an investigation to determine if Beck and Berlacca were co-conspirators operating a coordinated grooming ring within the high school.
Right, because the odds just seem impossible.
But as they mapped out the digital forensics, the timelines, and the communication logs, they reached a truly chilling conclusion. These two teachers were acting completely independently of one another. They were two solitary predators operating in the exact same school environment who just happened to zero in on the exact same teenage boy.
You can actually see the collision of these two separate abuses in the text messages recovered from Beck's phone. At one point, the student casually brings up an, quote, older teacher, unquote, that he finds attractive, mentioning to Beck that age is just a number.
And Beck's reaction is intense jealousy.
Yeah, she texts back, I mean, yeah, I guess, but even though our situation is still not right, at least we're closer in age. I don't like being compared to the older teacher.
Consider the psychological destruction of that boy's reality. We talk about schools needing to be, quote, safe spaces. But what does a safe space mean to a teenager living in a dual predator environment?
It doesn't exist.
He goes to history class, and his 27-year-old teacher is doing his homework, paying him via Apple Pay, and demanding emotional devotion. He walks down the hall to his next period, and his 47-year-old child development teacher is sending him pornography of herself.
It's a nightmare.
For this student, the entire professional infrastructure of his high school has become fundamentally predatory. The adults who are institutionally mandated to establish and enforce boundaries are the very people obliterating them. In that psychological state, the concept of reporting the abuse becomes impossible, because from his perspective, the entire system is corrupt.
And that leads directly into a massive question. If the grandmother found the videos and went to the authorities, and if the police reports document that the boy's own mother was aware he was having a sexual relationship with a teacher, how on earth did the school administration miss this? How does a dual predator environment flourish in a modern, well-funded public high school without a single administrator pulling the fire alarm?
That is the central question of systemic accountability in this case. And the investigative reporting by the Arizona Republic provides a deeply frustrating answer. The administration was not blind. They did not miss it. They were explicitly warned, and they chose not to act.
Unbelievable.
This introduces a critical bureaucratic concept known as the threshold gap in mandatory reporting.
Let's break down the timeline because the dates here are damning. According to the investigative documents, in February of 2025, which is a full 6 months before the police executed their search warrants and the teachers were finally placed on leave, a former student sent a highly detailed direct email to the principal of Centennial High School.
A direct warning.
Yes, this email explicitly outlined Haley Beck's boundary crossing behavior. It detailed her sitting alone in her car with the student for extended periods, the constant exchanging of Snapchats, and the inappropriate gift giving.
To understand the gravity of that email, we have to look at how mandatory reporting laws function mechanically. Under Arizona state law, specifically ARS Section 133620, educators and school administrators are legally classified as mandatory reporters.
Right.
The statute dictates that if personnel have any reasonable suspicion that a minor is being abused or neglected, they are legally obligated to immediately report that suspicion to law enforcement or child protective services. The critical phrase of the law is reasonable suspicion.
Meaning they don't need a smoking gun.
Exactly. The law does not require the administrator to conduct an investigation themselves, and it explicitly does not require them to have undeniable proof of a crime.
But despite receiving that email in February, the Peoria Unified School District did not initiate any official action. They did not alert the police. They did not contact Child Protective Services. They waited until August. 6 months. When journalists confronted the district about this massive delay, the district's official response was that the behaviors outlined in that February email, the car sitting, the Snapchats, the gifts, did not, in their words, quote, rise to the level of abuse that would be necessary to report.
And this is exactly what child safety advocates refer to as the threshold gap.
Mm.
The district bureaucracy was essentially arguing that because the February email didn't contain explicit proof of physical or sexual assault, their legal obligation to report wasn't triggered.
Which defeats the entire purpose.
Completely. As investigative reporter Hannah Dreyfus highlighted, that defense is incredibly weak. The specific behaviors listed in that email, secretive digital communication, physical isolation in a vehicle, and unexplained gift-giving are explicitly cataloged in the state of Arizona's own training materials as major red flags for grooming.
They are textbook signs.
By arguing that they needed proof of assault before calling the police, the administration completely inverted the purpose of mandatory reporting, which is early intervention and prevention. Because they chose to wait, the relationship was allowed to enter the summer phase, resulting in those 4,000 highly sexualized texts and the financial transactions.
Here's where it gets really interesting and where we have to look at the internal culture of the district. We noted earlier that Haley Beck is a legacy employee, the daughter of 2 long-term established teachers in that exact same Peoria Unified School District. When you observe a bureaucracy moving this slowly to investigate one of its own, you have to ask how much that legacy status played a role.
It is a vital area of sociological inquiry raised by the investigative reports. How does familiarity breed a dangerous level of institutional trust? In a tight-knit educational community, the children of veteran staff members are often afforded the benefit of the doubt.
Right, the nepotism factor.
It is highly plausible that when the administration read that February email, they viewed it through a lens of inherent bias. Oh, we know Haley. We've worked with her parents for 20 years. She's just an overly friendly young teacher.
Which blinds them to the facts.
That familiarity relaxes the stringent, objective oversight that should be aggressively applied to any educator accused of boundary crossing. While the reports don't prove a deliberate malicious cover-up, the optics of the 6-month delay, combined with her familial ties, suggest a culture where institutional protection superseded child safety.
The timeline of how the district eventually handled the terminations of the 2 teachers further highlights this bureaucratic sluggishness. Angela Burlaka, the older teacher who sent the explicit videos, voluntarily surrendered her teaching certificates to the state in November of 2025, and the district officially fired her in January of 2026. But Haley Beck. It took the school governing board until late March of 2026 to finally hold a 5-0 vote to terminate her employment.
And it is crucial to understand the mechanics of why it took until March. That termination vote only occurred after the conclusion of a massive internal Title IX investigation. Title IX is a federal civil rights law that prohibits sex-based discrimination in any school or education program that receives federal funding.
It's a very rigorous process.
It is. When a school conducts a Title IX investigation into sexual misconduct, it is an exhaustive bureaucratic process involving external investigators, interviews, and cross-examinations. The final Title IX report definitively concluded that Beck's behavior constituted predatory practices in grooming and legally classified her actions as severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive.
So they finally get there.
The district finally acted, yes, but the administrative machinery moved at a glacial pace compared to the speed at which the abuse occurred.
So getting terminated by a school board is a professional consequence, but facing the criminal justice system is an entirely different arena. And the legal realities of prosecuting this specific case present a bizarre and deeply frustrating challenge for the state.
To understand the current legal posture, we have to look at how the judicial system processes these investigations. The Peoria Police Department concluded their deep dive into the digital forensics and forwarded their official charging recommendations to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, commonly known as the MCAO.
Because the police don't actually file the charges themselves.
Right. The police do not file the charges. The MCAO is the prosecutorial body responsible for reviewing the evidence and deciding whether to formally indict these women and bring them to trial.
Let's look at what the police actually recommended. For Angela Burlaka, the police recommended felony charges of aggravated luring of a minor for sexual exploitation, as well as furnishing obscene materials to a minor. Those charges map directly onto the explicit videos she sent.
That's pretty straightforward.
But for Haley Beck, the police recommended 1 count of felony pandering. Now, in legal terms, pandering essentially means inducing, encouraging, or financially compensating an individual to engage in prostitution. The police tied the specific charge directly to the $630 she sent via Apple Pay, bolstered by her own text message calling it, quote, straight prostitution.
In response, Haley Beck retained a prominent criminal defense attorney named Matthew Long. Long has released public statements categorically denying that his client committed any crimes whatsoever. He has emphasized her constitutional right to due process and stated that a full, objective review of the facts will ultimately confirm her innocence.
Which is what you'd expect a defense attorney to say.
This is the standard expected posture from a defense attorney pre-indictment. However, the true obstacle facing the prosecutors at the MCAO isn't the defense attorney statements. The real legal nightmare is the victim himself.
Right. The student at the center of this, who was 16 when the grooming playbook was initiated, but had turned 18 by the time the police investigation reached its peak, flatly refused to be interviewed by the detectives. He completely stonewalled the investigation.
And we must deeply empathize with his reasoning. According to the police reports and subsequent statements from his mother, his refusal was driven by profound fear. He was terrified of social retaliation from his peers. He was grappling with the immense psychological shame of retroactively realizing he had been the victim of predatory grooming.
It's so much to process for a young man.
Furthermore, his mother expressed an intense fear that if her son cooperated with a highly publicized, sensational criminal investigation, the resulting media circus would obliterate his chances of securing a college athletic scholarship for football. The family made a calculated decision to protect his future from the fallout of his teacher's crimes.
But from a prosecutorial standpoint, how do you proceed with a reluctant victim? Criminal defense attorney Josh Colesrud analyzed this dilemma for the local news, and he laid out the mechanical challenges. If the MCAO wants to secure a conviction on a charge like felony pandering, they have to prove the specific criminal intent behind those Apple Pay transfers.
The intent is the hardest part.
Yes. They have the 4,000 text messages. Yes, they have the bank records. But without the victim sitting on the witness stand, pointing at the defendant and testifying under oath, yes, she paid me this specific amount of money in exchange for this specific sexual act. Proving that felony beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury becomes incredibly difficult. Defense attorneys can easily argue the money was just a gift or loan if the victim isn't there to contradict them.
Colesrud outlined the aggressive legal mechanisms the state might be forced to employ. The Maricopa County Attorney's Office has the power to issue a subpoena, legally compelling the victim to appear in court and testify against his will.
Which is intense.
However, this introduces a massive constitutional complication. Because the text messages heavily implicate the teenage victim in minor crimes of his own, specifically underage drinking and illegal drug use, he could legally invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination to avoid testifying.
Wow, I didn't even think about that.
To bypass that, the prosecutors would have to offer him formal, sweeping legal immunity just to force him onto the stand. It creates a horrific paradox. The justice system risks severely re-traumatizing the victim, dragging him through a public trial against his family's wishes solely to secure a conviction against the predator.
It is a painful, gridlocked legal reality. And while the lawyers and prosecutors are quietly battling over subpoenas, immunity deals, and charging thresholds behind closed doors, the public fallout from this case has been deafeningly loud. And that is entirely due to a massive, unexpected pop culture collision. Haley Beck is not just a teacher in Peoria, she is tethered to a massive digital empire.
This is the exact moment where the story jumps out of the local Arizona news cycle and detonates across global social media feeds. Haley Beck is the older sister of Noah Beck.
Noah Beck.
For those unfamiliar with the landscape of the influencer economy, Noah Beck is an absolute titan. He boasts over 27 million followers on TikTok alone. Furthermore, she is the sister of Tatum Beck, who is another highly prominent, successful social media influencer in her own right.
The architecture of Noah Beck's fame is the quintessential Gen Z success story. He was born in 2001, grew up playing competitive soccer, and actually secured an athletic scholarship to play for the Portland Pilots. But when the global pandemic shut everything down in 2020, he dropped out of college, launched a TikTok account, and went massively viral almost overnight.
Just a meteoric rise.
He capitalized on that momentum, relocated to Los Angeles, and began dating Dixie D'Amelio, who is another mega influencer. He then successfully transitioned from making short dance videos into high fashion modeling, landing major campaigns for luxury brands like Coach. He even starred in his own reality television show. But the crucial element here is how the Beck family brand was constructed.
The brand identity is key here.
It was heavily monetized on a highly curated, wholesome, athletic, attractive, family-centric aesthetic. They even participated in a massive Mother's Day modeling campaign for Coach as a unified family unit.
And that meticulously curated, highly profitable aesthetic is precisely what makes the collision with a real-world criminal investigation so incredibly volatile. You have a family empire that generates wealth by marketing a flawless influencer lifestyle, suddenly confronted with front-page investigative journalism detailing their sister's alleged predatory grooming, explicit texts, and felony pandering recommendations.
It's the ultimate brand paradox.
In the realm of digital media, this is a brand crisis of the absolute highest magnitude.
The timeline of their digital reaction is a fascinating study in crisis public relations. The story regarding Haley's termination and the details of the police investigation really broke wide open into the mainstream around late March of 2026. Noah Beck, a man whose entire multi-million-dollar career is predicated on daily posting, algorithms, and constant audience engagement, essentially went completely dark.
Radio silence.
He ceased posting on TikTok after March 25th. He stopped posting on his Instagram account after March 30th. He chose a strategy of absolute impenetrable silence. Tatum Beck, the sister, took a notably different tactical approach.
She kept posting, right?
She did. She continued posting her regular, upbeat lifestyle content, essentially acting as though the scandal wasn't happening. However, keen-eyed followers analyzing her digital footprint noticed that she was actively liking comments left by fans who were arguing that siblings should not be held responsible or blamed for the alleged actions of their family members.
This divergence in tactics sparked a massive sociological debate across comment sections, pop culture blogs, and PR forums. How does a massive digital brand navigate real-world, horrific criminal allegations against a family member who has been prominently featured in their content?
It's uncharted territory in a lot of ways.
The strategy Noah employed, the silent influence approach, where you simply stop posting and wait for the algorithmic storm to pass, is standard operating procedure recommended by elite crisis PR firms during active police investigations. The legal advice is always, do not say a single word publicly that could be twisted, used in a court of law, or inadvertently fuel the media fire.
But the dynamic between influencers and their audiences has evolved. They aren't just actors on a screen. They build their empires by fostering intense parasocial relationships, making millions of people feel like they're part of their family. So I want to ask you, the listener, direct about this. If you follow someone who builds their wealth and influence on presenting their family as a wholesome, aspirational ideal, does that influencer have a moral obligation to publicly disavow their family members' alleged crimes when the facade cracks?
It's a tough question.
Or is drawing a boundary of silence a fair, necessary, and deeply human reaction when your sister is facing potential prison time? It is an incredibly difficult line to walk between public brand accountability and a private family tragedy.
And while the internet was fiercely debating the ethics of influencer accountability and arguing over whether Noah Beck owed the public an apology video, another group of people were looking at the Haley Beck case through a completely different lens. They didn't see a brand crisis, they saw a political weapon.
This is a major pivot.
Political advocacy groups seized upon the meticulous investigative reporting out of Peoria to serve as Exhibit A for a much larger, highly controversial, systemic argument.
And this brings us back to that impartiality disclaimer we made at the top of the deep dive. We are now shifting gears. We are moving from analyzing the established facts of a local crime to analyzing how those facts are extrapolated and weaponized by political advocates to drive an agenda. We are looking at the policy reports and press releases published by Save Stop Abusive and Violent Environments.
They're very vocal.
SAVE operates as a 501c3 organization that aggressively advocates for men's due process, equal opportunities, and what they view as fairness in the justice system. And their framing of the Beck case is incendiary.
According to the extensive literature published by SAVE, the Haley Beck case is not an isolated incident. It is not the story of a rogue teacher slipping through the cracks. They argue it is symptomatic of a nationwide systemic epidemic of female teachers who raped their male students.
They use that exact phrasing.
They explicitly group the Beck case alongside several other recent high-profile arrests to establish a pattern, pointing to women like Marie Donaldson in Arizona, Ashley Fizzler in New Jersey, and Tara Johnson Swartz in Colorado.
But they don't just rely on anecdotes. SAVE points to broad data sets to back up this claim of a national epidemic. They cite a 2022 analysis that identified over 350 K-12 educators arrested for child sex crimes. More prominently, they heavily promote an online database known as the Teacher Accountability System, or TAS.
That database is central to their argument.
According to the reports published by SVE, this database currently catalogs over 17,000 cases of educator misconduct across all 50 states. They are using this massive volume of data to argue that the sheer number of cases demands a sweeping national legislative response, rather than just waiting for local school boards to quietly fire people.
They also utilize specific psychological profiling to build out their narrative of who these predators are. They extensively cite observations from psychotherapist Stacey Kaiser, a professional who works directly with imprisoned female sex offenders.
And what does she observe?
Kaiser outlines a highly disturbing, consistent profile. The most common offender in these specific scenarios is a white woman in her 30s. Crucially, Kaiser notes that many of these predators heavily utilize social media and digital platforms to connect with their victims outside the formal boundaries of the classroom, which perfectly mirrors the Snapchat usage in the Beck case.
It maps right onto it.
And perhaps most chillingly, Kaiser's profiling notes that many of these female offenders genuinely do not believe they have committed a crime. They psychologically rationalize the abuse as a consensual romance, completely ignoring the statutory and power dynamics at play.
So what does this all mean for the advocacy group? How do they use this profile in this database? SAVE uses this information to launch a blistering attack against what they view as a massive systemic media double standard. They argue that when a male teacher abuses a female student, the media immediately and correctly utilizes forceful, legally accurate language. Rape, assault, predator. But when a female teacher abuses a male student, SAVE argues the media systematically employs soft, minimizing language. They use euphemisms like having sex or engaged in an inappropriate relationship.
And they use the initial wave of reporting on the Peoria case to illustrate this concept of semantic softening perfectly. Many of the early headlines regarding Haley Beck described her actions merely as an inappropriate relationship with a student,
Which minimizes the reality.
SAVE argues that looking at 4,000 sexually explicit texts, financial payouts utilized for behavioral compliance, and blatant statutory boundary crossing and calling it merely inappropriate is a profound insult to the male victims. They demand the media call it what it legally is: statutory rape and sexual assault.
But the analysis presented in the SAVE reports goes far beyond media critique. They argue that this semantic softening is actually causing severe long-term psychological damage to the young men who are victimized. They cite psychological research demonstrating that male victims of female-perpetrated sexual violence suffer from profound intimacy issues later in life, elevated risk of substance abuse, skyrocketing suicide rates, and severe negative impacts on their academic and professional trajectories.
The societal failure to accurately name the crime, they argue, actively exacerbates the trauma the victim experiences.
What is truly remarkable, however, is the mechanical way Sabi takes this specific issue, female-on-male sexual misconduct in public schools, and connects it to a much broader, highly polarized cultural and political grievance.
This is where it scales up.
They argue that the media's minimizing of these specific crimes is just one symptom of a macro culture that fundamentally devalues, mocks, and attacks masculinity itself.
Right, the Savy reports argue that young men in America are not simply lost, as many sociologists and pundits claim, but rather they are under active assault by a culture that openly ridicules them. They point to cultural touchstones like a prominent New York Times op-ed regarding heterofatalism.
Oh, heterofatalism. Explain that concept really quickly.
Heterofatalism is the idea that women are becoming hopelessly frustrated with dating men because men are inherently toxic, broken, or dangerous. Savy argues that this constant societal drumbeat of anti-male rhetoric, combined with institutions actively failing to protect teenage boys from predators like Haley Beck, has created a massive boiling point of cultural frustration among young men.
And that cultural frustration is no longer just internet discourse. It is manifesting in hard, measurable political power. According to the polling data heavily cited by Savy, this deep-seated sense of grievance resulted in 4.5 million male voters actively shifting their allegiance away from the Democratic Party in the most recent presidential election.
4.5 million is a massive shift.
They are explicitly labeling male voters as the new power demographic. And the political establishment watching these numbers is absolutely panicking and scrambling to reverse the trend.
The political ripple effects detailed in the sources are fascinating to watch unfold because you see high-level politicians desperately trying to put the genie back in the bottle. Democratic leaders who previously leaned heavily into progressive gender rhetoric are now pivoting to launch initiatives specifically targeted at men and boys.
Like who?
Governor Gavin Newsom in California and Governor Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan are suddenly prioritizing male-focused political outreach. States like Virginia, Maryland, Washington, and Utah are actively pushing legislation to create official state-level commissions for men and boys to address these disparities.
On the federal level, the SAV reports highlight a major legislative push. The State of Men's Health Act, designated as H.R. 7602. The primary goal of this bill is to mandate the creation of an Office of Men's Health within the Department of Health and Human Services. The advocates point out a glaring bureaucratic disparity. There are currently 7 distinct offices dedicated to women's health within the federal government and 0 dedicated to men.
0. That's a striking contrast.
And they back this legislative demand with staggering public health data. Men in America die, on average, 5 years earlier than women. The male suicide rate is 4 times higher. And the economic cost of premature male mortality driven by suicide, cardiovascular disease, and cancer cost the U.S. economy a staggering $697 billion in the year 2020 alone. They are actively framing men's health not just as a social equity issue, but as a catastrophic economic crisis that the government is ignoring.
But the Savy reports also highlight the intense internal civil war this demographic shift is causing within political parties. While governors are trying to win back the male vote with new health commissions, other prominent politicians are doubling down on the exact rhetoric that Savy claims is alienating men in the first place.
The mixed messaging is wild.
They highlight specific comments from Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who went on national television and argued that Republicans are actively radicalizing young boys away from healthy masculinity and pushing them into an insecure masculinity that is based entirely on dominating others.
SVOs targets figures like Jennifer Siebel Newsom, the wife of the California governor, criticizing her documentary films that explicitly attack toxic masculinity and patriarchal structures. The advocacy group argues that this kind of rhetoric, blaming boys for their own societal alienation or lecturing them about how their inherent masculinity is toxic, is the exact mechanism that caused 4.5 million men to shift their votes.
Their political argument is simple. You cannot win back a demographic while simultaneously telling them that their core identity is the root of all societal oppression.
To illustrate how deeply this cultural battle over masculinity has permeated absolutely everything, SAVE brings up a completely unrelated event that occurred during the 2026 Winter Olympics. The USA men's hockey team won the gold medal in an incredibly thrilling overtime game. After the win, while still on the ice, they took a congratulatory phone call from Donald Trump.
Right, I remember that.
This action sparked a massive, immediate backlash from prominent progressive figures, most notably soccer star Megan Rapinoe, who publicly called the male hockey players clowns for taking the call.
If we connect this Olympic anecdote to the bigger picture, You see exactly how Sefi is weaving a grand, cohesive narrative. They look at the hockey team taking the phone call, refusing to apologize for it despite the media pressure, and they frame it as a massive victory for unapologetic masculinity. They argue that the vitriolic backlash from figures like Rapinoe is just another example of society instinctively trying to vilify men for simply existing and succeeding on their own terms.
Exactly. For groups like Save E, the Haley Beck case in Peoria isn't just the local crime story about a terrible high school teacher. It is the bloody shirt they wave to prove the existence of a systemic double standard. They use the facts of the Beck case to say to their audience, look at the reality of the systems you live under. Institutions protect female predators, school boards delay action for months, the media softens the language of rape into inappropriate relationships, and meanwhile, society constantly lectures these same vulnerable young men about their own toxic masculinity and patriarchy.
It is an incredibly potent, highly volatile political cocktail engineered from a local tragedy.
It is a remarkable journey of escalation. We started this deep dive by looking at the microscopic details of a high school classroom in Arizona. We analyzed the psychological trap of a teacher doing a student's homework, the mechanics of 4,000 Snapchat messages, and the catastrophic institutional failure of an administration that read an email detailing grooming and chose to do nothing.
Then we watched how that localized failure breached the firewall of the digital economy, triggering a massive brand crisis for a TikTok megastar whose family image was shattered by a police investigation.
And finally, we saw how the specific data points of that abuse, the female perpetrator, the male victim, the delayed consequences, the media phrasing, were absorbed, repackaged, and weaponized into a massive national political movement, fighting over men's rights, media bias, and the future of the American electorate.
It really connects every thread of modern culture.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive. We've covered a massive amount of ground today, from local laws to federal health initiatives. But as always, we want to leave you with something to chew on, something that builds on the mechanics of everything we've unpacked today.
Consider this paradox of modern life. We live in an era of absolute, unprecedented digital surveillance. Thousands of text messages, Snapchat logs, geolocation data, and $25 Apple Pay increments create an undeniable, indisputable forensic record of our most private interactions. The evidence in the Beck case was overwhelming and perfectly preserved. Yet, despite this massive, glowing digital footprint, the institutional blind spots remain equally massive. A school administration can receive a detailed email explicitly outlining the mechanics of grooming and simply choose not to see it as abuse.
It's the ultimate failure of the system. We have the technology to see the threat perfectly, the text or the blaring siren. But if the people in charge, the principal, the district administrators, the broader culture, refuse to listen to the siren or argue about what the word danger actually means, the damage just continues to spread.
Exactly. As the lines between our digital, private, and public lives completely dissolve from the intimate confines of a high school classroom to the algorithmic global stage of TikTok to the highly polarized rhetoric of the political arena, who is actually responsible for defining and enforcing safety. If the digital record is crystal clear, but the human institutions fail to act on it, where does accountability actually reside in our society?
It is a heavy structural question, but that is exactly why we do these deep dives, to look past the sensational headlines and understand the hidden mechanics operating beneath them. Thank you, as always, for joining us, for listening, and for your continued curiosity. Keep questioning the narratives, keep looking closely at the sources, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.